Welcome back, class. Another class on of mice and men. Today we're going to kind of go through characters, right? And have a whole lot of quotes that I actually want to go through because I want us to look at how the author allows us to see the characters around George and Lenny. We know George and Lenny are the main characters, so now we need to see all of these other characters that are around them and how they interact with George and Lenny, the conflicts that might come about, and how they become close and how some become enemies. And not real enemies, but antagonist protagonist type of situation. But quickly, let me just go through a very short summary. Um, Both in the book, again, if you have this version of the book, if you look at the start of it, of each section, there's a little summary. Section 2 says, the next day, George and Lenny arrive at the ranch and go to the bunkhouse where they meet most of the other main characters in the story. Candy, an old swamper with only one hand, Curly, the boss's son, the boss, who is suspicious that George will not let Lenny speak for himself, Curly's beautiful young wife who flirts with the other men, Slim, the top ranch hand, who is respected by all other hands, and Carlson, another of the established hands. Slim is friendly towards George and Lenny. Slim's bitch dog has recently given birth to pups, and Lenny begs George to ask him if he will give one to Lenny as a pet. Another summary that I have here, just the same thing but slightly a little bit more information, a different way of saying the summary. In chapter 2, we meet the rest of the characters. We learn who the other ranch workers are, and we kind of learn what kind of person they are. Candy comes in and we meet his dog. Curly, Slim, Curly's wife, Carlson, and the boss all come in at different times and introduce themselves. George tells Lenny not to speak when their boss comes in so that he does not think that Lenny can't work. When Curly comes in, he tries to pick on Lenny and start a fight because he likes to fight bigger men. George tells Lenny to stay away from both Curly and his wife so that he doesn't get into trouble. Carson suggests to Candy that they put his dog down and gets a puppy from Slim and raise it. Now, what we find about this, just even at somewhere there, we understand that different characters react differently to Lenny especially. And what George is doing, he's trying to protect their jobs. So he's trying to tell Lenny to not speak because they realize that this mental issue that Lenny might have, if he talks, they might think that something is wrong with him and he can't work. But George knows that Lenny's strength, which he shows in future chapters, is his actual physical strength, is what will help him to keep this job. So what is happening now is George is trying to keep Lenny quiet, but that's weird because Lenny is a big man, so everybody wants him to speak. But George knows what might happen if he speaks. He's going to get them into trouble. While that is happening now, George is seeing the characters that are obviously going to be a problem to him. One is Curly, and two is Curly's wife. Curly's wife seems to be way too friendly, and Curly seems to be way too hostile. So we notice the two ends of this issue and why Lenny has to stay away, because the hostility might bring out a certain level of anger from Lenny, and being way too friendly, Curly's wife, might bring about a problem like what happened with the lady in Weed, which made them run away in the first place, right? Lenny just wanted to be friendly with her, and they thought that he was trying to hurt her. So this is why George is trying to warn Lenny of what to do. Now, another character that seems to be overlooked, we mentioned him in the last one. We don't really meet Crooks, but we hear about Crooks. And it's interesting to see that the characters kind of already start not really shrugging him off, but speak about him as just the black person. And it's almost as if they're shocked that a black person is there. George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. Give the stable buck hell? He asked. Sure. You see, the stable buck's a nigger. Nigger, huh? Yeah, nice fella too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad, but the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot, got books in his room. So we're already starting to see even just how they view race, how they view color and things like that. and we'll realize that race and racism might be a theme that comes up further down. Now, here's another one. No, the wooden latch raised again and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soil brown Stetson hat, and he wore high heel boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. In those days, wearing boots that had heels on them made it very hard to labor out in the fields. So these were a sign of status, you would say. So, for example, nowadays, if somebody was working out in the fields, he wouldn't wear shoes that were shiny or sneakers that were expensive. That would be a sign of status. You wouldn't wear Jordans out into a field. You would wear field boots. So this was actually a visual way that you could see status and class. So this type of character description was important. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. Them guys just come, he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. Right? So we get to meet the boss and we get to understand this type of description and this type of status that the boss has. Right? Now, here is a description of Here's a description of Candy. Right? So, Candy. The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, grey of muzzle, and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly. Now, what is actually quite interesting with this, we've already met Candy, and now we're kind of meeting his dog. And the dog is obviously old and struggling. And the thing about that is that it represents Candy in a sort of way. That he's beloved, even though he might not be as useful as he used to be. And this becomes very important because Candy, in his old age with his one arm, he has his own little use, he does his thing around there, but it's obvious that he isn't a very important figure when it comes to the work. That will later on become important because you start to wonder now, does that make Candy feel useless? Does it make him want to be a little bit more useful? So this is obviously a factor, right? And the dog is obviously a comparison to that. The dog will become another symbol later down, but it's important to realize how deeply the author describes this dog. If this dog was just some other dog, he wouldn't have described it like that. So the dog becomes this symbol in the book anyway. Another quote that we're going to use. This is Curly's hostility now. Curly stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to. He turned towards the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him out, and then he turned back to the swamp and said, "What the hell's he got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him." The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. "That's the boss's son," he said quietly. "Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight and he's handy." "Well, let him be handy," George said. "He don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny?" So this is where we understand that Curly doesn't know Lenny, but he still has an issue because Curly has an overall issue with taller people. So he probably has a complex because he's short, right? Lenny now is very tall and very strong. So George is warning that if he doesn't back off, he might get hurt. And he says it here. "Sure," said George. "I seen plenty tough little guys, but this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is gonna get hurt if he messes around with Lenny." So what happens now is Curly is taking out his issues on Lenny. But George is trying to warn the guys that Lenny is not only strong, but he's not all there. So he will have no fear in mashing up Curly. And that's the last thing that George wants, because George actually wants to settle into this job. Now, here's another quote, and a very descriptive quote, so I want you guys to listen to how he's being described. A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long black damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty only achieved by royalty and a master craftsman. He was a jerkline skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to the leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner, and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim. Now, oh, there's one more. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. Now, there's a lot to take from this quotation. But the most important thing, right, is the respect that Slim has shows that he's at the top of the bunch. He's a top tier. He's the ranch hand that is respected. He's almost like the hero of the ranch. So therefore, we have to start thinking, now, how does this affect George and Lenny, right? You have George, who before this chapter we saw as the intelligent one, Lenny as the strong one. Obviously, Slim is a mix of both. So now we're going to realize that anything that needs to be put under control on this ranch, it has to go through Slim, right? And now we have to see, how does George interact with Slim? How does Lenny interact with Slim? And going forward into the other chapters, Slim will become an important figure when it comes to making the critical decisions on the ranch. And that is where the characters of chapter 2 blossom. Because not only are we being introduced to the characters, we're being introduced to how the characters are seen by other characters. We see how Candy views Curly. We see now how George views Curly, where there's a little bit of respect and fear, but they know that there's a complex that Curly has. But then we see how they view Slim. We see how they view Lenny. It's all about the perspective. And chapter 2 is a very important chapter because it breaks down the effect that each characters have on each other on this ranch. So this is where now the setting becomes a factor. Moving into the next class, we're going to start talking about the themes, right? And one of the major themes I might want to touch on is power and authority. Who is in charge, right? Curly, the boss, Slim, there is a power struggle, and power and authority becomes very important. All right, class, I hope you learned something today. I hope you read chapter 2. We're definitely going to move into themes of chapter 2, so finish reading chapter 2 and get ready for a quiz on chapter 2 next class. Big up yourself. Simo.